Initiation season is currently underway here in South Africa, so very often we hear horrendous stories of torture and pain. Over the past weekend, one initiate died in the Nelson Mandela Academic Hospital after being assaulted at a school in Ngqeleni. Yesterday, one initiate died in the Nelson Mandela Hospital. Now, over the years, it seems the transition to manhood has become synonymous with death. In the Eastern Cape, the initial death toll has risen to 24 this winter. Today on Newsroom, we look at the psychological impact the practice has on men. We are joined from our studios in Cape Town by Professor Kopano Ratele, an expert on men and masculinity. Very good morning to you, Professor. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Eben. Thank you for inviting me.
Initiation season, the transition into manhood, it's almost become synonymous now with death, pain, and in some instances severe beatings and torture. That shouldn't be the case. How do you view that, and what is going wrong?
Well, a critical part of this is going wrong. I know that there are serious interventions by government. Clearly, we're still way from where we need to be, which is that there should be no death, absolutely zero death, about what is supposed to be a beautiful transition from boyhood to manhood. And this really compromises this practice. And every South African who knows about this knows that come June, July, November, December, that a young man, young black man, young Xhosa man will die. But this is absolutely unnecessary.
I want to ask you about the transition. You mentioned that it should be this beautiful experience, beautiful cultural experience that celebrates the history of these young men. But we hear horrendous stories of abuse and assault, in some instances even of corpses being taken back to families and so forth. What kind of men are we creating out of these types of experiences?
As someone said a while back, abuse men abuse, so hurt men will hurt in the end. I mean, if we don't take care that we should be creating men who feel good about themselves, we give this young men who go into initiation a vision about what kind of men who take care of other young men, who take care of others, including partners, wives, children. If we don't create men who have this vision, but all they have, or at least a fundamental experience that they have from this period of seclusion, of losing their boyhood, is one associated with suffering and pain, as you said, these men are more likely, perhaps even highly likely, to transfer that pain, that suffering to others. And we're talking about men, young men who lose their penises, young men who have terrible experiences of being tortured by men who are not qualified, to transmit any values of manhood to young men. So clearly what we have here are charlatans, are people who run illegal schools. But I guess part of the responsibility also lies with the custodians, who are at least those who claim to be rightful custodians of this culture, that they are not doing enough. And enough is zero death. Enough is no suffering for this man, but only the necessary kind of pain that is supposed to go with this practice.
What do we need to change? What do we need to change to create or get men that inspire other men, that don't see violence as a first response, that don't objectify women?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned this word. I mean, violence is probably, as we said a while back, violence is one of our fundamental problems in this country. I mean, look, you go around some countries and you see how in summer in Europe or in other countries where young men would walk with short shorts, with skirts, and nobody at night, and nobody would harass them. And clearly, in this country, that comes out of experiences such as this, where young men would want to objectify, would want to abuse, not just women, but other men. So here's a provocative proposal for anybody who claims to be a custodian of tradition. Here's a controversial proposal I want to put forward. Is what about thinking about suspending? I mean, this has been going on for too long. So what about thinking of suspending initiation school for a period of 3 to 5 years until you sort out the mess that accompanies this every season? You should say, okay, let's stop, let's think. If we think this is important, let's stop. And so we register anybody and everybody who wants to lead young men into manhood should be registered, should be taught how to do this. So you are going to get out of this, because this will be a provincial in some parts, but also a national project led from the very top. You'll get men who are qualified to do what we say is transitioning young men into manhood.
Now, the practice is always coincides with secrecy. It's shrouded in secrecy and not sharing what happens during this initiation process. I want to ask you about the secrecy, but I also want to ask you, what are your thoughts on widening this practice and allowing other races, including my own children, to understand the Africa that they're living and what it means to be a man here?
This is a fantastic question. I mean, you know, there are moments and there are spaces where men have secrets, women have secrets, women have spaces where they talk among themselves about women things, if you will, feminine things, and men should have spaces like this. So I don't have a problem with the secret. I mean, there are particular kinds of secrets. If you didn't have secrets in the world would not function at all. I mean, there's a part for a secret. But here it is. I mean, if you start to conflate the aspects of transitioning into manhood with closeness only. So if you start to racialize them or you start to tribalize them, I think you're missing the point. The point then is that the aspects of Mr. Jansen, who wants to send his son to an initiation school, a school where they have about 2 weeks, 3 weeks, however long it is, to learn about particular aspects of manhood on this continent, in this province or in this country, should be open, this should be availed to him. And so we have learned about stories of 1 or 2 young white men who have taken the opportunity to do this. And this is fantastic because you don't have spaces like this in many parts of the world, including, I mean, you have only some in Native America, I mean, where American Indians live. So you could really, if you do with this very well, you could be making South Africa one of the cultural moments in the world, a cultural space where young men from all over the world, not just South Africa, would come to learn about what is a vision of manhood in the 21st century.
I could not agree with you more, but I want to conclude our discussion this morning, Professor Kopano, by talking about the value of tradition in this day and age. And we understand that, you know, the world we're living in today, gender roles are changing. The country that we're living in, more and more households are headed by women. But the traditions still remain very, very strong. How do we accommodate all of this in a changing world, in changing households, changing society?
Well, let me be clear about something people tend to misunderstand. And this is that everybody in the world has a tradition. It doesn't matter whether you live in the most highly developed, highly modern societies, Iceland, France, the US, or Hong Kong. Everybody has a tradition. Tradition basically means that every moment you speak as part of a group with a perspective to the past, that what you do has been influenced by your father or your mother, your mother's mother, your father's father, past generations. So all of us always talk about that, including on any aspect of the world. So tradition is actually part of the present. It's always there. Somehow, some people mistake tradition as something that happened in the past. No, traditions happens every day. You think about yourself as a member of a group, and that group has a perspective about where they came from and where they're going. What you need to keep on doing is reminding people that traditions change. Tradition will always be changing.
Professor Kopano Ratele, thank you for joining us. Wonderful insights again, as always, when you come onto the show on this very, very emotive issue around initiation and the deaths of young men here in South Africa during the process or the rite of passage, becoming a man. What is it to be a man in today's world? Wonderful views. Should it be open to other races? If you want to, why not? How do we teach our children about Africa, about African tradition? I think it's a wonderful idea. Professor Kopano Ratele also thinks that maybe we should take some stock about the process and even suspend initiation season for the next 3 to 5 years in order for us to come to terms with the deaths and the pitfalls that the tradition is struggling with right now here in South Africa.